Opening. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hutchins. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Association of Nonprofits. I'm in Portland this morning on this sunny, beautiful morning. Thank you all for spending a few minutes with us for MANP Connects to get to know some of the new executive directors and CEOs in our nonprofit network in Maine. There have been lots of interesting changes, and I'm just so excited to introduce you to just a few of them today. Leaders in our community that we're just so fortunate have stepped up to assume a new role in their leadership journey as executive directors of some really important organizations here in Maine. So, so thanks to them for being willing to hop on for a couple of minutes and introduce themselves and let us know what's on top of mind for them. And before I actually start introducing them, I just also want to say, you know, one of the things we know here at the Maine Association of Nonprofits is that the role of executive director is a very unique one in the nonprofit sector. It really is. Oftentimes, it's a big role in terms of the many different interests of whether it's the public or community interests or client interests. Stakeholder issue and the board and staff, and it can be a heavy lift. It can be both an honor and present particular challenges. And so I just like to mention that at MANP we're very attuned to that role and how important it is in our communities, and how whatever we can do to facilitate the people who assume those roles, as well as cultivating the positive relationships with their board and their staff and their community. And so just grateful to be able to be a statewide organization that's here for all of you. And today we're going to shed a particular spotlight on our executive directors. Okay, so I'm going to launch right in. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to ask Deborah Ellwood. She's the new president and CEO of the Maine Community Foundation. Good morning, Deborah.
After 2.5 years on Zoom, or you'd think I'd know how to unmute myself, but good morning.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Actually, I think it's a good sign that we're not so automated quite yet. So we are still human after all. Deborah, thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes. I know you're brand new to the role. And so I'm very grateful for you taking the time. How are you?
I am good. Really, really happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.
What a beautiful time to be here. But I think this is my 8th day on the job. So all good.
Yeah, yeah. Deborah, I just want to let people know you are coming from running a organization called CF Leads, correct? You'd been doing that. It's the network of community foundations across the country, and You've worked for a number of nonprofits, and I think I read that if there were a particular focus in your past, it would have been education and children. Is that correct?
Certainly child policy and philanthropy. Yeah, children's policy issues.
And so when you coming to the Maine Community Foundation, what's exciting you and motivating you about wanting to take on this leadership role in the state?
Well, so as you mentioned, Jennifer, I do come from an organization called CF Leads, where I was the CEO, and where we were helping community foundations across the country, of which there are more than 800, to really help them build what in the jargon of the field is their community leadership, their community leadership muscle, to really work in partnership with others in other sectors to really make a difference, sort of beyond grants. Grant making is important and necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. So I have worked with hundreds of community foundations sort of every year, in particular at the CEO and board level. And so it was just really, and I also was on the board and a vice president at a community foundation in upstate New York. So it was really nice to have the opportunity to get back down on the ground and really do the work at in a state where I love. I fell in love with Maine and Bowdoin when I was a high schooler in Minnesota, of all places, not necessarily someplace anyone in Minnesota knew at the time. And then now I have, my brother lives in the state and I have in-laws. So it's just a wonderful time to come back up here. And then the foundation itself, is just, has a terrific board, really leaning into our new strategic plan. I knew a number of the staff, as I said, because I've worked with community foundations. And then we can get more into this, but also just really attracted to the organization's values. But just a state that full of community that adds up to one big state, which the Community Foundation touches on.
Yeah, great, excellent. Yeah, so coming from a place where you were seeing what many of the 800 community foundations were facing, what currently are at the top issues for community foundations in terms of their role in building a state like Maine or whatever particular region? What sort of currently what are they grappling with, or what are the challenges or key challenges or opportunities that they're talking about, considering that community foundations are so important to our communities?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Community foundations are really stepping up. Like many of you had to through COVID. It was just a real time for folks to step up. And across the country, our area of focus, obviously, or perspective was community foundations. We, in fact, did some research and really identified the areas of momentum for community foundations. And we had at CF Leads, and we found 3 areas. One is that community foundations across the country are insisting on racial equity. And, that's in part due to the racial reckoning that was sort of sparked by George Floyd's murder. But there have been others who had been centering racial equity, making it as their North Star in some cases. And that is one area where we really are seeing community foundations really attempt to do this work both externally and internally. And it's a journey. People are in different places. Communities are in different places. Communities are different. And their demographics and all kinds of things are different, but that's one. The second area where community foundations are focusing is in the area of amplifying community voice. And, the Maine Community Foundation, has its county committees, and so is already really trying to keep its pulse on this very large state and the different communities across the state. And then finally, one of the things that's been interesting is to see that community foundations are attempting to influence policy and systems, recognizing that in order to make the real kinds of improvements in communities and to really build strong communities, it's going to take policy. That's where one of the most resources are. Of course, single policies can touch all of us, can touch millions of us, and being willing to lean into that. And that's pretty new. When I first got into the field, some 20, 25 years ago, people were very afraid of that. And I think now are managing that very, very well. So those are the 3 areas we see the field in general. Everyone does it their own way, as I said, because communities are different and it needs to reflect each community's priorities and culture.
That's really exciting. I'm excited to hear that. My assumption is that those are aligned really well, specifically with Maine Community Foundation's values, right? And focus. And so I'm super excited to see the work that you're doing. I know at the Maine Association of Nonprofits, we just came back, our team just came back from Washington, D.C., where we had met with our National Council of Nonprofits. And there absolutely does seem to be a genuine effort to bring the people together around the table, funders and nonprofits, to build. One of the things we're trying to do at MANP is really work on a cross-sector vision. So how do we put the issues on the table, and then bringing the people together who can be part of that? And it means building relationships among the various nonprofits doing work. It means bringing the funders. It means centering the constituents, and then building those relationships with both government and business. And it's exciting for me. I personally get really jazzed about that type of collaboration and problem solving and community building. And it's encouraging for me to hear that seems to be one of the reasons that you're excited to be at the Maine Community Foundation.
Absolutely. It's going to take all of us to continue to build this state. And yeah, one of the key values of the Maine Community Foundation is collaboration, and another one is equity. So those are really important, and we're going to continue to live into those in all we do. So really, really excited to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Deborah. And I understand that your team has been coming up with times where there will be opportunities to meet you out in the public, and we should stay tuned for that, is what I understand. So. Absolutely,
absolutely. We've got a session in up here in the north near Ellsworth, and then another in Portland.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for that. And I'll look forward to meeting you in person.
Yes, thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to move on to our next new executive director, if that's okay. Thank you, Deborah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Hi, everybody.
Tam Huynh is the relatively new executive director of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine. Tam, are you still there this morning?
I am. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. Hi, how are you? It's so nice to meet you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing? You have such a really great journey because you've known the center a long time, and you've actually served on the board in the past, and you started your leadership journey as a young person at Coney High School, I think, and here you are. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about that, about how you came to be in the role that you're in and what you're excited about working on these days?
Absolutely. It's hard to believe decades later after that high school experience. But in thinking about the HHRC, you're right. I'm relatively new to the executive director role, but I have actually been part of the HHRC for nearly 30 years. And I really got involved with it being part of what is called the Diversity of Leadership Institute conference that was fully sponsored by the HHRC. And when I went there, it was really the first time as a young BIPOC adult that I was surrounded by other like-minded student leaders who wanted to make a difference in our school communities. And many of us strongly identified with other marginalized groups within our schools. From there, it completely changed my life. It steadied me as that young BIPOC adult to understand what was going on around me. And I really credit the HHRC for giving me that space to have a voice. I went on to reclaim my birth name and be much more comfortable with my identity, and even start doing work alongside my peers. Quite frankly, Jennifer, it made me realize I could do so much more beyond what I ever imagined. So naturally, I wanted to stay involved. So I continued to be a team leader at those conferences. I went on to speak with school administrators in school communities just to share my experience and encourage them to think about how to create spaces, not just for those members that belong to the BIPOC community, but moreover, those student leaders. And then I even had an opportunity to become a board member, to your point. I certainly went on to serve other board terms, before assuming this executive director role. And quite simply, it has been the most rewarding, personally and professionally enriching experience I've ever had. Certainly, it's in thinking about the many things that we're doing, it's really twofold. One is that piece that's so rewarding being in this role as that young adult who was able to learn about combating bias and understanding prejudice, and again, making sense of what's going on around me. I get to witness that, seeing other young adults in schools, and not only seeing, but hearing it from community members as well. And the piece that's so important, very similar to what Deborah was speaking about, of not just doing that work in our communities, but also doing it internally as staff. So really taking a close look at what fuels us to have this strong sense of belonging, and how do we create spaces, brave spaces, where we can have these conversations, where we take risk and show care and compassion, and learn more about one another. It's no easy task, but it's one that I'm privileged to do every day.
Yeah, wow, that's super inspiring, Tam. I just want to come up there and hang out with you all the time. That's really great. Is there something specific that the center's working on coming up that you'd like to share with us? Ways that, if people are curious about learning more about the center, the ways you might encourage them to do so, or?
Absolutely. So we are working certainly on extending and expanding some of our educational programs, certainly extending it to communities that we might not have as strong of a presence in, and expanding that those educational programs within that anti-bias work in particular, to help meet the needs of where people are, and doing that work alongside of them.
That's great. That's great. Now, in terms of, because we do have a lot of executive directors on the call, and we have a lot of people who work in nonprofits, I'm going to turn a little bit to the being an executive director versus being a board member. Can you think of anything that maybe has been surprising to you, or a lesson learned in terms of shifting from those two very different vantage points? And you're already smiling really big, so I mean, it looks like you probably have something to share.
Certainly. The very first moment I realized I was making that shift in roles was attending my first board meeting days after taking on the executive director role, and I went to vote, as I would alongside of my board member peers, and being quickly reminded I am in a new role. So but moving away from that for a moment, I think what has been incredibly humbling is that there are certainly places where I get to roll up my sleeves and really dig into the day-to-day. Again, I love this work. So I can't believe I get to do that piece of it. But other places where it's shown up of that distinction between board member and executive director would be this beautiful gray area of shared leadership that happens between the board chair and the executive director. And I've just been so fortunate, again, to have not just had that previous board experience, but to have built such a strong relationship with the board chair, both the past and the new board chair, and having been a board member, having to have that opportunity to establish trust before assuming this role. So recognizing that candor is a gift, and that continues, thinking beyond just this given year to really raise sights for what the organization can do.
That's such an important point. Having clearly, I can tell in the way you're describing it, you have such a keen awareness of the skills that are required in having those candid respectful conversations and being it, but it's all based on that trust, right? And that really, I kind of had an aha moment in my first executive director role when pretty early on, I went on a road trip with the board chair, right? And because we were going to a conference out of state, and in that car ride, I realized that he trusted me, that, you know, he made some kind of, we were having this conversation, he made a couple of comments, and it was so obvious in that moment that I was like, oh, he respects my decisions. And once I knew that, it was like, oh, well, we can have disagreements, because all I really need to know is that he respects me and he trusts me. And then we can build the like, well, I would think we should do it. So I'm so glad you raised that point and we're willing to share that, because we talk a lot at MANP about that relationship between the board chair and the executive director can really set the tone for the just really for how the board gets along and staff. And so that's great. I'm glad that it sounds like that's an area that you're spending a lot of time cultivating and working on. So congratulations. Thank you for coming, Tam. I really appreciate your time this morning.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. It's been a pleasure.
I hope to meet you in person sometime. Yeah.
You as well.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay. Okay, next up is Melissa. Melissa, where are you? Hi, Melissa.
Morning.
How are you doing?
You know, I'm hanging in there.
You're the executive director of Habitat for Humanity in Bangor. Is that right?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about how I also know your background is primarily in fundraising, or is that right? You were most recently with Good Shepherd, I think.
Correct. Yeah. So I've been in the nonprofit sector for over 30 years in a variety of different roles, primarily in community engagement and outreach that dovetailed into development work. I was most recently, as you mentioned, with Good Shepherd Food Bank for over 10 years with part of their development team, and saw that organization truly transform itself over that course of 10 years, and as it continues to do and does very important work. So my most recent background has been really rooted in poverty work and dealing with the challenges that so many Mainers face in terms of lack of resources to really take care of their foundational needs. My story is that I stepped away from Good Shepherd during the pandemic to care for aging in-laws. And so I was really in tune to the challenges that our senior population faces in terms of just those transitions and how important it is for them to stay in their own home for as long as they can. And then balancing that with the work that we did at the food bank, with knowing how many families work so hard and just can't get ahead. And certainly in the real estate market that we're in and the construction challenges that are faced all across the country at this point, the dream of home ownership is just very far away for many, many Mainers. So this opportunity kind of came to me. I happen to be very familiar with Habitat through my church that I attend here in Bangor, and many church members were connected, very active in some of the projects, past builds, but many of them have served on committees and different board positions. So I really had that trust with a lot of community members that I knew that if they were that dedicated to the organization, that it was a mission that I would want to give serious consideration. I'm originally a Southerner, so I was very familiar with Habitat being headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, or Americus, Georgia. And so it had been always familiar with the mission and, sort of a somewhat participant in this community. But the more I learned about it and to see the transformative work that the mission really affords an individual who can get into their own home, it was something I wanted to be a part of.
And is this your first executive director role?
It is. And I've been here for 5 months. Every day I'm learning something new. Every day I'm learning a new hat that I'm now to wear.
Surprising? What's the biggest surprise so far? Like becoming, it's like if when you're a parent and things start happening with kids and you're like, nobody told me.
Right. Yeah. When are the grown-ups going to show up to take
where's
over?
the manual? There are actually more manuals out there probably for being an executive director than being a parent, but anyway.
Right. And the challenge becomes, who has time to read the manual when you're doing the work? So
exactly.
I will say I'm very fortunate in that we are an affiliate of an international organization. So there are incredible resources at my disposal through Habitat for Humanity International, as well as I have been embraced and welcomed by the other executive directors of the other Maine affiliates in Maine. We have a monthly call of those executive directors, and they're all at different stage of their own, tenure with their affiliates. Some are brand new. Some have been there 10, 12, 14 years. So there's a wealth of information, but they have assured me that there's, no silly question, no questions too small, no questions too big, because they've probably answered it in a variety of different ways over their times. We have a brand new director down in Hancock County, so I'm no longer the newbie. So that feels good. And I've actually been able to point her in a couple of directions. Honestly, the biggest challenge that has been sort of a surprise is recognizing that not only do we want to be a strong organization and a community partner to the partner families that we work with, but just how important it is to me personally. I want to be a good employer. And our staff here at the affiliate have been through a lot of transition. COVID was very rough on our programming in particular. We run a retail business through our Restore. That was shut down for several months, and we rely on that revenue to help support our programs. We are, primarily in a volunteer-run program, and all our volunteers were shut down. We weren't able to go into people's homes to do critical repairs. Many of our volunteers don't like to admit that they are considered seniors, and they were the ones being asked to stay home. Yeah. And then you realize throughout the phone calls that were coming in that during COVID, when people were asked to stay in place, to stay home, take care of yourself, stay in place, and when people don't have a safe home to do that in, that really is what really resonated for me in terms of how important our mission was. But the effect that has had on our staff, and we have had quite a significant amount of leadership challenges and leadership transition. So it's really important to me, and that I recognize that the board was already making big commitments to implementing a health insurance plan, and taking a look at our compensation packages, and just making the commitment to invest in the organization so that we can continue the work and be true to our mission. It didn't seem very genuine to be working to help our clients get a leg up and create a path forward if we weren't also extending those same opportunities and providing as many resources that we could to our own staff. So that's been an area that is not my expertise, and not where I've had a lot of experience, and have really relied on the board members that are from that sector to help guide that process. And I've just been very proud of the board for being committed to that. So yeah,
I'm really glad to hear that, Melissa. It gets a little, it dovetails nicely with some of the things that Deborah was sharing about community foundations and the conversations that are being had around racial equity and equity in general. We at MANP, again, with our partners, our national partners, are focusing on the nonprofit workforce. And we understand very well a bit of the rock and the hard place that often nonprofits fall under, which is we want to do what's right for our workforce and our workers and our employees. Our values are such, right? Just like you said,
Right.
How can we be out there talking about supporting people if we're not going to walk the walk, right? And actually support our employees. On the other hand, the real pressure is that we don't have access to the same interventions that maybe the private sector has, like where we can just raise prices, right? Like,
Exactly.
You can't, if you're trying to provide these services for people, you can't just necessarily, start saying, well, we're going to charge, do a 300% markup or whatever. And so I will say that it's been encouraging to me that a lot of our partners in the funding community are having really good discussions around making sure that grant making keeps up with inflation and recognizes that inflation has incredible impact on work that, when you think about the work that Habitat or Good Shepherd or all the Catholic Charities, the gas prices, right? We live in this huge state and people spread all over. And we have a friend up in Aroostook County, Dixie, who does all the driving around. Everybody knows Dixie, right?
Know her well. Yeah. Yeah.
Shout out to Dixie.
You don't even have to say her last name. It's just Dixie from the county.
Everybody knows Dixie. And she's got her truck, right? And she's driving around making sure all the seniors up there have the things that they need in their homes. And anyway, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent there. I understand, but I just want to underscore that, first of all, thank you for being a leader with your board and focusing on that. And I want you to know that we understand how hard that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are, again, it's part of that perfect storm that really just slammed everyone involved with Habitat in terms of, our volunteer base kind of evaporates. And the in the construction industry, supply chain issues, contractor availability, cost of building materials, not to mention that many of those items we have been very fortunate to have donated as gifts of in-kind donations of even, land to build the house on. A contractor would, reduce their price for us. We would have, construction materials donated. None of that is really happening right now, given the limitations that, others are up against. They either can, be making a great profit themselves, should that be their focus, but it's really more just limited resources and limited time because they are so busy. So now the great favor is, can you please just squeeze us into your schedule, So that's been a real challenge, but starting to see a little bit of that easing off. But again, knowing that we need to do more with this, do more and not expect to do it when we're expected to do it with less, it really becomes that challenge. And the big bad word in nonprofit fundraising is overhead, and everyone wants to see how that your overhead is low, and no one wants to fund the overhead, and yet we can't do our work without that. So it is a challenge, but fortunately, Mainers are very generous, and this issue touches everyone. So the conversations that I've had, people have been very empathetic to, and really are rooting for us to keep the work going and really engage in the way that Habitat does. Are there less expensive ways to build a house? Probably so. That is not necessarily our mission. Our mission is the act of service and engaging the community in something bigger than themselves. And when you're able to do that and see the multiplier effect that it has on that particular family, that's when you're on the right track.
Great, thank you so much. My colleague Molly just put a great link in the chat about we have some resources available for how to reimagine how we talk about overhead.
Wonderful. Yeah, I see that. Thank you, Molly.
Yeah. So Melissa, thank you for coming this morning.
Sure,
I'm
thanks
really
for
delighted
inviting
to
me.
meet you. I hope I get to see you in person sometime. And please know that MANP is here I can guarantee there will be more ED surprises ahead for you.
Yes, I'm bracing it. I did learn in a recent training through Habitat, one of the mantras for the new executive directors was, I can do anything, I can't do everything. And I have plastered that all over my bulletin board because I have usually worked pretty independently or had a lot of autonomy. And that is not the way to be an executive director. So I'm learning to engage folks and really expand the wealth of experience that we have on our board and in our staff and in the long-standing volunteers that we've had. So I'm feeling like I'm in really good company. So I appreciate that.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you, Melissa.
Sure.
And hey, everybody, unfortunately, Ian couldn't join us this morning. He had I think Kelly told me a vet emergency. Did I get that right, Kelly? So unfortunately, he couldn't join us. But check out Ian Bannon's work that's happening at Mayo Street Arts in Portland. He's doing he and others there really building some really great community. He was at Celebration Barn and now he's running Mayo Street Arts, a community arts center right here in downtown Portland. So make sure you check it out. We'll invite him back. This has been a really popular program and there are many, many, many other people we want to invite you to. So be sure to come back in a month and we'll have some new people to introduce you to. But before you go, I want to invite Samaa Abdurraqib to the screen. Samaa is the new executive director of the Maine Humanities Council. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. How's it feel? How are you doing? How's settling in?
Settling in is going well. I mean, I think, as someone who was already working at the Maine Humanities Council for, I think it's been a little over a year, I'm just really grateful that I'm already familiar and it hasn't been like dropping into the vat. So it's been going pretty well.
Great. You have quite a resume and an incredible leadership journey yourself. I was wondering if we could start by you just telling a little bit about how you came to be a leader here in Maine, running the Maine Humanities Council.
Sure. So I've been in Maine since 2010, and I came here for an academic job, and I taught for 3 years and decided that I wanted to stay in Maine. And if folks know anything about the academic job market, you don't always get to choose where you want to be. And so I realized that probably meant that I had to switch careers. And so I shifted into nonprofit work. I used to teach literature and gender and women's studies. And as I shifted into the nonprofit world, I learned about the Maine Humanities Council. And I was like, oh, I would love to facilitate or work with them in some kind of way. And I sent in an application to be a facilitator and no one contacted me. And my heart felt broken. But eventually I was invited. A facilitator they were working with wasn't able to facilitate a reading group in Southwest Harbor because he didn't want to make the trip. And I love Maine. And I was like, I would love to drive the 3 hours as long as you put me up for the night. And so I facilitated this book group called Muslim Journeys. And it was really meaningful to me and to the folks at the Southwest Harbor Library. And I think that was back in maybe 2014. And so that began my relationship with Maine Humanities as a facilitator, as someone who developed reading lists for them. Prior to becoming associate director at Maine Humanities, I was working at the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence and very happy in my role supporting domestic violence advocates across the state and doing, training, doing some policy work. But this position, the associate director position, opened up, and I had this moment where I just was like, I would love to return to being immersed in literature. I would just love that. And it felt like it was time for a little bit of a change. And so I applied and got the associate director job. And then when the previous executive director made the decision that he was going to retire his position, I thought, should I try this? I never thought I wanted to be an executive director, but, and it just seemed right. So, yeah.
Well, great. Fortunate for us. So one thing I'm really curious about is I also know that you're a writer, you're a poet, you're a creative person. And I know as an executive director, I know that sometimes, or a lot of the work that we do as executive directors sometimes doesn't really feel very creative. And so I'm curious how you balance your energy, because in terms of making sure that you're giving yourself time to fuel that side of yourself. And do you feel like it's super integrated, or do you see them as sort of separate hats, like shifts? I was just curious.
That's a really good question. I think I've always seen my work and my creative life as separate hats. I'm someone who compartmentalizes really well, which is why I'm able to do so many things. I think that the pandemic has kind of eroded that for many reasons. But so my generative creative work, my writing, does feel very separate, and that feels right to me. Like I want to be, the focus is different. But I feel like as an executive director for this organization, we're a really program-driven organization. Most of our staff are program staff. And so for me, it's really important to be close to programming. And that feels very creative in a really different way. And that's the thing that I enjoy, working collaboratively with the program team to figure, to devise new programming, to figure out how we're moving this organization into the next phase. That feels generative and creative in a really different way than.
In a very different way, right? Yeah. Yeah. So picking up on that, and then I'll let you go. We try to be really good about letting people get on their day. So I feel like I could keep asking you questions, but I won't take up too much more of your time. But along that vein, what's sort of currently where's your energy going at the Maine Humanities Council? What are you excited about? What's getting you out of bed every morning to show up? And I'm just curious what's happening that you might want to share.
Yeah. So some of the things that we're doing is trying to continue to make sure that we're in right relationship with all of our community partners, all of the folks who do work with us. We work with a lot of facilitators across the state. This is how we're able to deliver programming, because we're a small staff. And so just really making sure that we're doing the best to support our facilitators, to enhance their skills. We're working with facilitators and training facilitators in correctional facilities, and just trying to ensure that we're giving folks the same that they're giving us, so that it's true reciprocity and not just, utilizing people for how they can help us. That is important to us. We're also, we're in a time right now where it's just so many people, as Melissa just talked about, so many people, I apologize. So many people's basic needs continue to be in jeopardy. So many people, our rights to safety and bodily autonomy are also in jeopardy. And so just thinking about ways to continue to make the humanities relevant for folks. I think that during the pivots during the time of the height of COVID, I mean, we are still in it, but people were very excited to get connected through the programming that we offered up, to come together, to talk about literature and big ideas. And now we're shifting into a different place, you know, where people are less excited about connecting via Zoom. And so we are trying to make sure that our programming is responding to that. We are making sure that we are going to make relationships in regions where we don't really have solid relationships, and we're listening to organizations and community members to see what's needed and how our programming might benefit folks. And so that's exciting. We're also, I'm really, really excited about this. We're also, we've just hired on a new staff program person who is also working in communications. So now we have a full communications team, and we are utilizing communications much differently as a collaborative space to highlight community partners. And, you know, I think there was a time prior to my joining the staff where our communications was just like a list of things that we have coming up, and it's really evolving now, and that's really been powerful. So those are just some things that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited. As Molly said, you know, humanities are so critical. You know, they are central to us, to the fabric of us being able to be in communities together, in productive communities, respectful, safe communities together. And I'm encouraged by hearing your energy focused in that. I think we're just so fortunate that you were willing to assume the role, Samaa. So thank you. Welcome to it. I hope you'll see our organization as a support to you, if we can be at all. And thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate it. Hey, thanks everybody. We are going to wrap up because we try to keep this right on time for everybody, but we are going to do that. I want to thank our sponsors, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Northeast Delta Dental and Maine Biz. It's super important for them to be supporting us and being able to offer this program to you guys consistently. Tune in for our August, because we'll have some more people who are leading our organizations. Can't you just hear the energy and the positive work that's happening, and people who are committing themselves to strengthening Maine and Maine communities? And so thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at the next MANP Connects in August. Thanks everybody. Have a great Friday. Have a good weekend. Get out there and walk on the earth, and I don't know, enjoy Maine. Thanks everybody. Bye.